to build long-term wealth throughout your consulting career, let's welcome Dr. Harvey Meier to the IMC Inside Track. Good morning, Harvey.
Good morning, John, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be sharing some thoughts with you today about rainmaking, and I look forward to interacting with you as well. And if you do have questions, I believe there's a chat feature here, and you could ask the questions, and John will forward those on to me. So this is going to be a pretty fast-paced discussion. It'll last probably about an hour, maybe a little bit after 11. And of course, if you have questions, it could go on maybe beyond that a little bit. So we'll go ahead and get right into it. But when we talk about the rainmaking challenge, for example, John, I know you have a question you wanted to ask in that regard as we get underway here, and then I'll get started.
Thank you. So Harvey, what do you consider the big challenge consultants face as independent business owners?
My observation has been, not only with those I know and connect with, but also personally, is that we're all pretty talented and skilled in our respective crafts. No doubt about that, or we wouldn't be in the business that we're in. But it's not unusual for many of us to be tentative about the sales and marketing process, tentative about asking for the business, tentative about promoting ourselves and our expertise in what I like to think of as a non-sales manager. And this is perhaps one of the challenges, one of the more significant challenges that we find ourselves making, John, all right, encountering.
Thank you. And I'm sure you've got a lot more to tell us about that.
Well, I do. I just need to get this, the screen, the PowerPoint working. Okay, there we go. So why is it, let's see here. Why is it, let me get it set up here. Why is rainmaking important? That's really, I think, what you're asking here. And from my perspective, it's important because as an independent consultant, small business owner, and so forth, my view is that rainmaking is the means by which we generate a revenue stream, a steady revenue stream that enables us to support our lifestyle that we want for our families and for ourselves personally. And if we are unable to generate a sufficient or significant enough lifestyle to accomplish that or achieve that individually or personally, whatever our goals are, then perhaps we should work for someone else. So John, go ahead. You there?
Well, yes. We all can work for someone else, and to start our own practice or to work in a small group is always challenging. And it comes down to always doing selling, always being open and looking for opportunities to serve. And when you go into, whether it's a Zoom meeting or you're at a coffee shop or you're visiting with friends and you're being introduced to people, how do you introduce yourself?
Well, before I get there, I just want to make a comment on the slide that's on the screen right now. When does rainmaking really start? In my mind, rainmaking starts the first time that we meet someone. And what I really mean by that, the mindset that I have, I'll go through several others later. The mindset that I have every day I get up in the morning is that every day is a sales day. Whether I meet someone in person, by email, by text, phone call, etc., that is the time that the selling process begins. But my sales process is what I call oblique. It's an oblique sales process, oblique marketing, and I think you'll understand the flavor of that as we go through the various mindsets. Your question is, what do we really do, let's say, when we first meet someone? And when we are really asked when we first meet someone is, well, what do you do? Just think about some times when you've met someone or been introduced by someone to someone else that is, and everyone we meet, I always view as a potential prospect, whether they're a client or they're a prospect from the person, from the perspective of introducing me to someone who they know. One of the mistakes that I think can be made, I'm not saying anyone online has ever made this mistake, but one of the mistakes that can be made is to immediately start off with your value proposition. And there's an old adage among salespeople, and that many salespeople, we're not saying we're salespeople, but in the sales profession, so to speak, will do what we call vomit all over the customer, all about the features and benefits of their product or their service. And my philosophy is, don't start with your value proposition. What you want to do is tell them, in my mind, who you are first. And what that means, for example, in my case, I usually try to pique their interest. I want to pique their interest. I'll expand on that in a moment. I just say I'm self-employed and I'm in business for myself. I want to portray that I'm an independent entrepreneur right from the get-go. And then I want to throw out a teaser in terms of how I go to market with my brand and so forth. They say, well, I'm a CEO trusted ally to CEOs and boards of directors. And when I do that, I can see on their face or hear in their voice, sometimes there's a pause, because in their mind, they're kind of saying, well, I wonder what that really means. And so what really is the purpose? I want to go back this slide. What is really the purpose of what I'm trying to accomplish? I want to get the person I'm talking to probe and ask for more information. I want to pique that person's interest and asking me, well, what do you really do? What's that mean? What is that all about? And that's really what I'm trying to get the other person to do, so we can engage in a conversation before I even get to the point of answering their question. I want to entice that person to want to get better acquainted with me and to ask to meet with me in person, perhaps at another venue. So when I get to answering the question, I typically they'll say, well, how do you do that? Or what's it about? And my answer typically is something like this. I show or I guide my clients how to exercise good judgment, make wise choices and wise decisions. And that's targeted specifically to my target audience, which happens to be solely at the CEO and board of director level of privately held companies. This is what they struggle with most from my perspective as I've engaged with them over the years. And at the same time that I'm having this conversation right up front here, I'm attempting to identify their personality. Because if I can identify their personality, I can then adjust my conversation with them. And I'll go into that a little bit more detail. And I've spent a lot of time learning how to do this over the years I've been involved with consulting. It was one of the first tools that I was introduced to by my mentor, and I used it ever since, and it's been really kind of a godsend to me in terms of adjusting my communication style to accommodate the communication style of receiving and processing information of whomever I'm speaking to. The other thing that I wanted to say is this. Most consultants that I've been associated with, or I hear making presentations and so forth, and I read the value proposition that they publish, say, I help. They use the word help. I would highly recommend you never use the word help again. It puts you in my mind in terms of a subsidiary position. I can have someone come in and help me build a fence, help me mow my lawn, help plant grass. But I like to use the word show and guide. That's action oriented. They're going to get a value benefit out of working with me. But the word help, I've removed that from my vocabulary, from my language, written material, and so forth. It also is a good, it helps with our own mindset in terms of what are we really there to do and provide to our clients. We want to quickly assess their personality. And then mentally, you want to identify the potential need based upon their personality. And then you can begin to evaluate you can then begin to articulate your value proposition based upon who you assess you're talking to. If you're talking to a decision maker, your conversation will be different and they will absorb what you say and react differently than if you're talking to a direct report or a subordinate or an employee and so forth. So it's really important to be able to identify right up front who you're talking to. For my practice, I've made it a priority to ultimately only talk to decision makers. They control the purse. Doesn't matter what the client's budget is and so forth. They're going to make the decision and call the shots, and they can adjust their financial situation to accommodate us if there's a need that they perceive we can help fill. When I use the word guide, I like to think of being a river guide. Never been one, but I've gone on a lot of rafting trips and so forth. And that's why I like to use the word guide as well as the word show. It just depends on who I'm speaking to at that particular point in time. The other thing I like to do is if, let's say I'm talking to a CEO, I like to get engaged in a conversation during this whole process right up front. And one of the things I usually do is when they say, well, tell me a little bit more about what your role is as a CEO Trusted Ally. I say, well, I ask questions and I do it like this. I say, do you ever find yourself being lonely in your position? What's it like sitting in the corner office? Have you ever second guessed decisions that you make? Do you have anyone you can talk to in complete confidence without reservations? As soon as I make that statement, they get it. They look at me. They understand it. I've tested this out with a number of my CEO clients as far as the value proposition statement and how to go to market like this. I can't even finish making those statements. And they say, I get it. I got it. So then I say to a client, well, let me give you, maybe this will help. I'll give them a short story example of a particular situation I've encountered. And I try to make sure the example I give appeals to their personality. Okay, I might say something like this. Well, let me expand a little bit. I just finished a project like that, and let me tell you about it. But we could talk about that if you have interest. Or the client will bring a situation up and say, well, I'm experiencing something just like that or something. Let me share this with you. And I'll say, without overselling, I'll say, I expect I can address that with you, but we really need to schedule a separate, private, confidential meeting to explore that issue further so that I can properly assess it and respond accordingly. I never get a turn down on doing it, never get pushed back when we get to that point. All of this can take place within a 3 to 5 minute time period. It goes boom, boom, boom. And if you're in a group meeting or so forth, then you set up the time, you get their contact information, and away you go. So that's how I like to how I'm answering that particular question. This process has worked extremely well for me. So we're going to move on to the 10 mindsets that we were supposed to be talking about here too. And the first mindset is, consulting is a business. My mindset is, if I can't make the living that I wanted to make when I started 32 years ago doing this, then I was going to get out of the business. And I wanted to view it, I'm a sole practitioner, I'm an independent entrepreneur. My clients know I'm not in between jobs. They know I'm not doing this on a part-time hobby basis. They know this is the business I'm in, and that's what I've promoted, and that's what's helped develop my network over these years and the clientele base that I have. This is who I am, what I do. I love what I'm doing. And that's what helps me generate the revenue stream necessary to meet what I call my monthly net. It also helps me keep in mind that my goal is not only to cover the monthly net, but at some point in time, we're going to hang up our spurs, so to speak, and retire. So I want to be able to focus on building wealth like any other entrepreneur does, like the CEOs, for example, or owners of small businesses that I'm consulting with. My client CEOs range from very small businesses to billion-dollar entities, because while the sales volume is different, when you're sitting in that corner office, it's just the magnitude of your decisions that makes a difference. But people's behavior is pretty consistent. And so I'm dealing with behavior, emotions, leadership challenge, decision-making processes. But the one thing I found that really has been helpful to me, within a few minutes, they get that I understand their business model. They get that I have a Ph.D. in economics and finance. I don't even have to go into much detail about that. They get that I've worked for a financial institution. They get that I've been a part-time CEO for some of my clients, and they get that I understand their business model. That all gets dealt with within a few minutes up front, and then we get into their issues, because you got to develop. I try to get them to develop confidence in who I am in those initial conversations. In your own mindset, I think there's a mindset that we need to be able to portray ourselves. And I've learned this over the years, because when I started in 1989, this was not my mindset. I didn't know who I really was. I didn't know if I was going to be the best at what I do. I didn't have that self-image. I was really tentative about my own self-perspective. And consequently, when we can believe in ourselves and we portray to others and project a level of self-confidence in a humble way, not an arrogant way, that really goes a long way in terms of immediately establishing that bond, that connection with whomever you're talking to. We've got to believe that we're expensive. Don't undervalue your value or the services that you're providing. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later. You got to believe in yourself and the value that you're bringing to that client. And you've got to ask for the business. I learned this one statement, and it's resonated with me forever. The very first IMC conference I went to in 1993, and I went there because I started in 89, but I was really tentative. I did not think at the time mentally that I could measure up to members of IMC. It had such a prestigious reputation and credibility at the time that I was really, really tentative about going, but I went to Chicago, attended the program, and so forth. And one of the sessions I went to, they had this person, and I can still visualize it, giving a presentation about selling. But the one thing that he made that has always resonated in my mind was this: timid consultants have skinny kids. Well, I wasn't skinny, but my kids were skinny. Okay, they were thin, and so it's not that they were going to change their physique and so forth. But that has always resonated with me as a great takeaway. The other thing that I've learned is this too. Sometimes those people that are in selling, and I've been in sales too in my career, and gone to several sales training programs, brought in some really sharp sales trainers to clientele meetings. I was client engagements I have, is that when you feel that you've made the sale, don't overstay your welcome. Sell yourself and sell yourself out of an engagement. Sometimes salespeople just over talk, and they keep talking and talking and talking. Pretty soon you may have sold yourself out of that engagement. Just get up, adios, great, the sale's done, and move on, and then get back to them later. I think one of the things here is when we're talking to someone, and in terms of how we perceive ourselves, project that our business and personal philosophy and image, that we are trustworthy, that we maintain good integrity. We're not arrogant, that we will listen well, always ask questions. That's the most significant tool that you can utilize to understand how to serve your client or submit a proposal to work with them. Don't aggressively try to sell yourself. This is what I'm talking about as far as oblique selling. And that let the client know, communicate that you are in high demand, that you're a scarce resource. Even when I wasn't making any money, and people would ask me that knew me in Spokane where I was at, whether it was Rotary or the Chamber or meeting on the street or lunch, they'd always say, well, how's it going? There was times when I didn't have a dime in my pocket, so to speak, as far as clients were concerned during the first 6 months. I would tell them it's just going great. And I always projected that I was doing extremely well. And the reason was that clients do not, and when you want to allow them or you can portray that you are a scarce resource, that you're in high demand. And clients don't want to be perceived as unable to retain you or get you to work for them or afford your professional services. And we'll talk about pricing a little bit more later. And even in the worst of times when you're not doing business or you don't have any business, you gotta exhibit that level of self-confidence, and ultimately you will end up with a good project. So this is my mindset. I perceive myself as very expensive. That when I talk to clients, I try to portray the value that they're going to get about retaining me. And one of the first questions that always comes up at some point in time, well, what's the cost? I've got that question all the time. I never answer it right away. Never. I defer on even addressing that. I say, I'm happy to answer that. But first of all, I have a number of questions for you to make sure that I can accurately respond to that question. So may I ask you some questions? And they always say, yeah, go ahead. I want to find out what their needs are and so forth. And then during that process, I'm portraying to them the value that I might bring to the table to assist them in responding to those needs. And then we can come back to the cost question. And so what I always do is I'll say, well, for projects like this, I never quote a fixed fee. I never quote an hourly rate. But what I do is I give them a range, a total range. It's going to be between this number and this number. And generally I know what I'd like to end up with, and I quote something a little bit higher than that. And consequently, I'll say to them, this is what other clients have chosen to pay me for a similar project. And the CEOs that I'm working with, as an example, they don't want to be perceived as being cheap and so forth, and be paid less than what others are paying for. So we really, it really helps mitigate even worrying too much for me about what the cost is, because I'm prepared to walk away. If we can't reach an understanding, that's fine with me. And then they say, well, I don't know, I can't really afford that and so forth. After we've kind of talked a lot about what is it that they want to achieve, and I'll say, well, I can adjust that if you like, but what would you like to remove from what we've talked about me doing for you? No one wants to remove anything. They just want lower costs. And when I say that to them, they realize, they come back and we don't have a further conversation, because I never discount my fee. My fee, once I quote it, I stick with that. But what I will do is I will adjust the terms. And if you really want to know more about how you do that, I don't want to belabor that here. Give me a call. I'll share that with you as far as how I've been able to price, adjust my terms, and actually end up making more by an adjustment of the terms than the original fee that I quoted. And I do that many times, just did it the other day. So when you think about your valuation, for me, it's got to be, I look at a day, what's a day's worth, and then I look at my geographic market area, maybe about $4,000 a day at the low end, so to speak, but I don't quote daily fees. I typically factor in what I think the project's going to be. I've always told myself that I want to be able to price myself now, not when I first started, but now, no less than always a little bit less or under what their attorney is being paid. And I always find that out in advance, because I ask who your legal counsel is. And typically I'm pretty familiar with the law firms, the major law firms in my trade area. And then I get to ask them, and they'll tell me what they're paying that person. That helps me factor in, where do I want to be? Because I perceive my value is just as good as a lawyer's value, but from a different perspective. And then I said, like, I quote a range. And when I quote the range and we agree on that top end fee or whatever the fee is, I never bill the full amount. I always bill something less than that so they feel like they got a good deal because I'm pricing my services at a level high enough where I can do that. So sometimes, and like I said, when I get pushback on the fee, I just ask them, what would you like to remove? But I do not quote, I don't talk about hourly rates or anything like that. That just makes you a commodity. And we are not commodities. You're not a commodity. Each of you has a special talent, a special skill, and you don't want to put yourself out there as being a commodity, so to speak, in my mind. So that's what I really mean when we talk about our philosophy and our self-image. We want to talk about how do we do business with other clients. We want to project high self-confidence, your self-image of being trustworthy, honorable, and then most important, the client has to believe that you're there to put your self-interest aside for their best interest. And if one can adopt that philosophy, I wrote a book on that too, about that whole concept. And I found that when I adopted that philosophy of putting my own self-interest aside for the best interest of the client, my practice just surged. It just, kind of went out the roof, so to speak, because somehow, and I can't tell you how, I was projecting that persona, that perspective, that level of confidence, but that I was there to assist the client. It wasn't about me. And as a result of doing that, money has not been an object with any of my clients. It's not about the money. It's about assisting them in solving an issue. So mindset number 3, I view, again, just to reiterate this more specifically, every day is a sales day in some manner. I like to put your game hat on in the morning before you make contact with anyone. I have a checklist on my desk with names and contacts, and I might not call them every day, but by the end of the week, I've talked to everyone I've thought about, targeted, connecting with. I want to touch at least one person every day around my current workload. It could be a phone call, it could be a text, an email, something like that, to stay in touch, to keep what I call motion moving in the marketplace. When I'm traveling, I do the same thing. If I go into a city and I've got a meeting, in between meetings, I've set up meetings with other folks or prospects or people that can refer me and introduce me to prospective clients. I don't waste time. It's a full day. I have a breakfast, usually, or a lunch or a dinner, something of that nature, because my goal is, every day is a sales day, and my goal is to keep motion moving in the marketplace. And once you adopt that philosophy, at least for me, it's never failed me. And then you get calls from people just unexpected, or they've been referred to you, or you've worked with them in the past. And it all happens because you have a mindset of an entrepreneurial mindset somewhere along the lines like, well, at least this works for me. The other mindset I have along with this one is that I like to think about answering the phone on or before the first ring. And you'll say, well, that's unreasonable. How can you do that? That was the philosophy. I went to Ohio State University for my Ph.D. program, and there was a gentleman that was also from Ohio State, and you probably know the company he started, Fred Smith. Fred Smith started Federal Express, and look what Federal Express has come to become today. This was the message that he had everyone answering the phone have top of mind. Answer that phone on or before the first ring, because what it means is you exceed the customer's expectations. And so what it means for me is that I'm going to follow up and follow through with everyone I meet in some way, form, or another. When I promise a client a project, I usually ask for a few extra days. So let's say Lyle, who's on the phone, I see his picture right now, and I are working together, and I promise to deliver him something within a week. I will deliver it 2 or 3 days in advance, because it sets a mindset on his part in terms of being able to depend upon me. I always make sure I deliver before the promised delivery date. I've never failed doing that. It helps me differentiate from others. And who do I differentiate mainly from? Sometimes from a competitive point of view. It's not other consultants so much, it's CPAs, excuse me, Lyle, and attorneys, because they are notoriously late, not responding on time. So many CEOs I talk to try to get a response from their attorneys and they're late, or they just fail to deliver in a timely manner and so forth. They're notorious for that kind of behavior. That's how I differentiate myself from some of my competition. And what that philosophy does for me, it implies to the client that they are my top priority. And sometimes you got to stay up late at night, get up early in the morning to meet this commitment. But it makes at least for me, it's made a substantial difference in how I've been received in the marketplace. Number 4, have a niche market. Niche markets are one that I'm not sure I see many consultants having developed. Many consultants, and I'm not saying anyone on the phone does this, but my experience with the consulting profession has been that many use a shotgun approach. My approach has been to develop what I call niche markets, which I'll explain in just a moment. And the reason that I've done that is that with the economy, it has its ups and downs, and some markets are going to do well. Some sectors are not going to do well. So when those that are doing well, you really thrive. And when those don't do so well, things go south. But if you have a combination of niche markets, then when one isn't doing well and the other is, you're not going to have a substantial reduction in your cash flow. And businesses, the businessmen or CEOs that really understand how to run their companies know that you run it based upon cash flow. And that's the way I look at my business model as well. And as a result of having niche markets, I actually have been able to create what I call a recession-proof business model. When the market turned down because of the housing crisis in the mid to late 2000s, I didn't miss a beat. The pandemic, my revenue stream has stayed steady and constant just because of this particular philosophy. Never miss a beat. Steady annual incomes, 6 figures or more. Okay, and that's been the model I've tried to create to support my lifestyle. So I don't take a shotgun approach. Niche markets, I have 4 particular niche markets. I target each niche market. What I use, the tools in one fits another niche market, and it's worked out really well for me. And I offer a wide range of services depending upon the client's needs. I'm like a chameleon to them. And because of my background and experience and so forth, I've been able to do that. Maybe it's in the financial management area. It could be leadership development. I don't even use the word executive coaching anymore, but I have to go along with it because that's the term that's used. And so many consultants from a competitive point of view are putting themselves out as executive coaches. I'm way beyond and portray myself being way beyond being an executive coach. Mentoring, coaching, but an ally, a trusted ally, someone that CEO can talk to in complete confidence, bring up personal matters, business matters. I just got an email just before we started with the CEO that says, I need your guidance, call me. And during our session here, I postponed that. That's the relationship that I want to have. Someone that is not only there, it's more than being a trusted advisor. That term trusted advisor is used widely by financial service providers and by consultants and so forth. I'm beyond that. That's the brand that I'm promoting that seems to resonate well as a trusted, being their trusted ally, their confidant, so to speak. And so I can do board governance, all kinds of things. I do executive search. I'm sorry, that followed off now. Executive search, accounting services. And I'm going to talk to Lyle about that. Training and development, merger acquisition. I do all of this, but not every client I have doesn't know this. They see me through their lens in a certain area. But I have all these types of program services that I've honed and developed that I can weave into a relationship with a client in 4 niche markets. So that's what has enabled me to develop, I think, a solid reputation, a wide network of solid referrals, use of crossover templates and tools and systems I have, and it's enabled me to have a recession-proof business model. So if there's a way you can take what you know, what you're doing, and the services you provide, and carve out some niches where you can be known as the go-to person. You might, and the world is filled with consultants. I don't worry about competitor consultants. There's hundreds of them, thousands of us that are consultants. But when you look at a bell-shaped curve from the research I've done, and if you want to be in that top 5% on the right-hand side of that bell-shaped curve, I think I'm pretty confident what I'm sharing with you today will help you get there. It will show you there's some tools here that you might want to adopt that might enable you to move from that middle 68% from a standard deviation curve into the upper 5%. And when I started this business and I went through that first IMC national meeting, that became my long-term goal. So when we talk about I think we've done with number 4. Okay, we're going to go to number 5, which is known skill sets and tools. And each of you has a set of tools that you've perfected that you can deliver to a client. And if you look at your toolkit and so forth, which tools might give you the entree into piquing a client or prospect's interest? I have a couple of them that I use. Typically, I use a lot of assessment tools up front to make sure that I understand who I'm dealing with, the personalities, and so forth. And then there's a system I use called the one-page business planning system. Some of you may have heard of that, but it focuses on accountability. And one of the biggest shortcomings my clients experience at the CEO level is lack of accountability among their direct reports and having a system in place that forces that accountability in a business-like manner. So that's a tool that I use when I sense there's that kind of need. What my mindset is, and you might consider it too, is you want to be perceived as the master preferred consultant in your specialty. I know that sounds far out. Sounds like it's a dream, but if you have that self-image of yourself and project that image to your clients, they will perceive that as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about the discovery process shortly as well. But your systems and your processes are your intellectual property. They're business collateral. And when you get to the point in time where you might want to retire, they provide you as a potential retirement plan revenue stream. They can be sold to the next generation of consultants coming in behind you. And I did that I did that about 14 years ago with no non-compete, and I'm still using all those tools. But the person that purchased them, his practice just excelled almost overnight, so to speak. So don't forget that you have intellectual property that you've developed, and you might think about that if you think about developing an exit plan. And Lyle Dixon on the phone here, that's one of his specialties, if I heard him correctly before we got online, specializes in working with clients to facilitate and assist them in facilitating a transaction or a transition plan. Is that a right conclusion, Lyle? So he's on mute, so I can't hear him. But what I'm saying that if you see Lyle on here, get a hold of Lyle. He's in Canada. And he can be.
You're correct in what you said. That is basically what we do.
And he can be a great resource for you. And that's the value of these kinds of arrangements with IMC and in the Northwest here. The reason that we are doing these kinds of sessions is one of the values of being part of IMC is the ability to network with others. And I'll talk more about that in just a moment. So the next slide is about the needs discovery process and your pricing model. And that's what I really want to talk to you about. How do you really identify clients' needs? And then how do you price your services? So what I'm really talking about here is when you're talking to a client and you eventually have, with the experience that all of you have and so forth, it's going to be fairly obviously in a short period of time that you're going to identify you're going to identify some solutions based upon your experience and work with others. But you do not want to be sharing those solutions right away. You may not even want to share solutions until you get more information. The key to successfully winning an engagement is to listen with the intent to understand and not reply. And too often, as you're listening to a client talking, these solutions are coming to mind and you interrupt and you begin to, so to speak, do what I said earlier. What salespeople typically do is vomit all over the customer. What I have found really helpful to me is that just about the time I'm ready to open my mouth, because I'm almost struggling to retain myself from doing so, I ask one more question. And by doing that, it's surprising how much more information that additional question generates for you that might even end up changing the approach that you take and what you ultimately propose to that prospect. Sometimes we jump into offering solutions too quickly without fully understanding the circumstances being described to you. Asking open-ended questions is extremely important. And so if you fail to ask and you fail to listen with the intent to understand, you're missing a great opportunity to connect with the client. But more often than not, we can end up making false assumptions about the perceived needs without doing what I like to think about as separating fact from emotion. We've got to keep the emotion aside and stay focused on getting the facts. And probably one of the real successes that successful clients experience or consultants experience has been the ability to be comfortable exploring the ambiguity of situations, probing, asking questions, listening for observing the emotions and so forth. So when you're talking to a client, there's a process I like to follow. I'm not going to go into it in great deal. It's called shifting the gears. And it begins by trying to identify the needs. And then something that's really important that I always do is I ask what I call an even keel question. Well, who else have you been talking to? What other consultants are you talking to? Have you worked with another consultant before? How did that arrangement work out? What did you like? What didn't you like? What would your expectation be, let's say, from someone like me if we developed a relationship with each other? And all the while, I'm trying to, through the conversation, assess that prospect's personality and communication style so that I can adapt my conversation to the person I'm talking to. And I call this kind of the shifting the gear process. I used to have a worksheet I used to do that, and I don't do it anymore because it just becomes natural. It's a natural process to go through. And I learned that through some of the sales training programs that I personally participated in when working in the corporate world, and from some of the really outstanding sales trainers that I brought into clients of mine as well. So when we talk about, really, you hear the term scoping the project. You probably heard that too. And that falls into this mindset as well. And so when I think about scoping the project, I do it in several ways. There's two steps. Step one is what I call the diagnostic phase. And I'm really trying to determine, why are we here today, or why are we having this conversation? What piqued your interest, for example, to meet with me? Tell me about that. Tell me what's going on in your company, your business. What are your concerns, etc. And a lot of questions like that. And then you can keep following up as you talk to the client. Oh, at the end of the day, with the issue you've talked about, how are you going to measure success? What does success look like to you? What objectives do you want to accomplish? And you're engaged in a conversation and you want to get the client to do the majority of the talking. Ask questions, take notes, take good notes, because my memory is not that good where I can recall everything in the nuances. and so forth during the conversation. And usually I'll ask the client, well, may I take some notes? And they sure, go ahead. And sometimes we'll even summarize the discussion. The second phase then is what I call step 2, the action phase. And then I'll say, well, I believe these are some of the areas and priorities that you would like me to consider addressing. Is that correct? And we review the key areas, and then when I make a proposal or a contract, and I even tell this to the client on site, I like to, at the end of the day, consummate the relationship when I'm in front of the client. And when I was in sales, I always did that. I never followed with a written proposal outlining what I was going to do until I knew we had an arrangement. So if I can't sell on the spot and get a commitment, or at least a tentative commitment that we're going to work together, more likely putting all the time and effort into developing a written proposal is not going to work. It never has worked well for me. For me, I try to make the transaction, consummate it then and there with some, and then I'll put it in writing and codify and memorialize our agreement in writing, and we might go back and forth on just for clarification purposes. But when I get up and leave, I want to know I have an arrangement or close to it. And if it doesn't feel good to me, it doesn't seem right for the client, I'm going to tell prospect, I'll tell him or her that as well. And there's times when I'll refer them to another consultant who might be a better fit, or who they are going to be inclined to retain at a lower fee structure than I have. And we're going to talk about fees, the fee structure process next. But I use what I call a diagnostic assessment first. I've got to get a lay of the land, and I use my assessment tools, and I interview people, and then I come back and I share my summary recommendations of how to proceed with the client. And this works for my clientele very, very well. And for other clientele, you'd have to determine what works best for your clientele. So then, when we talk about everything we've been talking about, it often comes down to the money. And when you really think about a lot of things that we deal with in life and decisions that are made and engagements and so forth, at the end of the day, money tends to be top of mind for a client. What's the cost going to be? How much? Well, I get that asked early on. What's the cost? How much is this going to be? And I never answer right away. And I often assess what's the personality, again, of the client. You see, I pay a lot of attention to communication behaviors, how they receive and process information, because that guides me. I need to adjust my communication style to be influential with the client that I'm working with. And I tell CEOs that too when I'm coaching them. Their role is to be influential to a large extent in a non-autocratic manner. And if they can be such, then they can influence the growth and prosperity of the company, not by the position they hold or the title they hold, but who they are as a person. And if we can communicate and project that style on that part, you often will end up building a really good relationship, a solid, lasting, long-term relationship with clients. One of the things when I get asked that question early on, my response has always been, I look at them, I kind of smile, kind of in a joking manner, and I say, I'm probably going to be the most expensive consultant you've ever retained. And the expression on their face is really interesting, and I laugh, and then they laugh, so you got to have a little levity there. And I said, but likewise, the return on your investment will be the highest you've ever earned. So I'm demonstrating confidence in the value that I'm going to be bringing to the table. That seems to resonate really well without even talking about numbers, because I want to see that I have self-confidence in what I'm going to be able to do for them and help them gain confidence in my self-confidence of myself without being arrogant. I know that sounds a little arrogant, but I've done that so many times, and we laugh and joke about it. And I say, well, I said, in a way I'm joking with you a little bit, but it's true. That's what my other clients tell me they've gotten because of our relationship. No one has ever asked. What I find really interesting, I never get asked for references. No one, after this whole conversation, no one says, well, who can I talk to about what you've done for them or who you've worked for? And I could give them a whole list. And I say, well, would you like some references? No, don't need any. Because they want to be able to make their own independent decision, okay? Only those that don't have a high degree of self-confidence will want to ask others for a reference, and then you just give that to them. But I always say, I'll give you some references. I'll call them in advance, and then you can call them, make the introduction, ask them any question you want to ask about. So when we talk about money, priorities from my perspective, we need to know what do we need to generate to cover what I call my monthly nut. Overhead, household expenses, overhead expenses, my benefits, insurance, because we all self-fund, well, at least most of us self-fund each other. Those that have spouses working can participate in their insurance, and benefits and so forth. But for those of us who are the sole breadwinners, then we've got to cover all of that. And that means you need to keep that top of mind, that's what I mean. What's my monthly net? Then I like to say that I've got to diversify my practice so that I have multiple sources of revenue coming in. And it's not just from consulting, it might be from partnerships with others, consulting arrangements and so forth. So I'd like to make sure I've got a diversified practice in terms of revenue streams that I'm producing. My goal long-term is to build what I call wealth, not from a greedy point of view, but I've got to fund my own retirement plan. I've got a 401k profit sharing plan, but I'm the one that funds it, just like at a bank where you get a match to whatever you put in. Well, I've got to match 100% of that contribution so I can plan for retirement if and when that day ever occurs. So one of the things to keep in mind when I talked about niche markets earlier, there are many consultants who in a way could be described as one-trick ponies. They have one product, one service that they are offering. Excuse me. Yeah, drink here. That they offer their clients. And so when one project gets done, when one ends, then they don't have others they can fall back on. So you're right back out to looking for new projects. So I think it's really important to have different product offerings, like I mentioned earlier, niche markets and multiple projects going on simultaneously so that they always go away. Projects don't last for a lifetime. They come and go for a variety of reasons. And that's why I think it's important to diversify our business models. So when we talk about pricing strategies, we'll take a look at what I suggest that we avoid. One, don't bill by the hour, because then you're just a commodity in my mind, and you get likened to attorneys, 20-minute increments they bill for automatically on their phone or whatever. Or accountants, I don't mean to demean accountants, but it's always on the hourly basis. Our value we deliver is far greater than an hour's worth of work. I can have a 5-minute conversation, like I'm going to, it'll be more than 5 minutes, with the CEO just emailed me, and it's 20 minutes probably, and he says a quick call. That is worth far more than 20 minutes of an hourly rate. Only don't guarantee a delivery of what you're providing to the client that you have no control over. If you can't have influence over the end result, how the advice is going to be used and so forth, you can't guarantee a result. Don't underprice your services, because when you underprice your services, you're lowering your self-worth. And as soon as you do that, you'll find out could potentially become a practice that you carry forward with you. I like to keep on the Seek side a daily or project fee in mind. I always tell clients I'm available 24/7. Most consultants don't do that. They quit at 5 o'clock Friday, they're done. They quit at 5 o'clock at the end of the day. They don't work on weekends and so forth. I've never done that. I never have the weekends abused. After hours are never getting abused. But what it does, by telling my clients I'm available, there are times when they do need to talk to me, especially at the CEO level, because a crisis comes up, and they can call me anytime. There is real value to doing that. They can't do that with their legal counsel very easily, maybe not even with their CPAs unless it's during tax season. But what it demonstrates, 100% commitment to their best interest. And I don't have it abused. I like using systems with clients, tools that I have, and get them familiar with using them. And probably one of the most, maybe a really important takeaway here is I used to be tentative about pricing my services. And I was worried, well, are they going to go for it or not? I've stopped doing that probably for 25 years. And that is just before I open my mouth and quote a fee when I'm sitting in front of the client, I add 20% to it. And you would say, that's really egregious, isn't it? It's really, how can you do that? I've never, ever had a problem doing that, and I've never had a turn down. And because I have to value my own self-worth and my own self-confidence. And when I do that, it's okay, good to go. So when I do that, that really helps me portray in my mind, who I am, okay, and the value that I'm delivering to that client. And it also supports the commitment that I'm personally making to assist that client. So many consultants I know tend to undervalue the worth that they're providing to the client. And that's why timid consultants have timid, skinny kids has always resonated in my mind. That led me to this kind of tactic. All right. So what are some other general thoughts that we might consider? Well, we're going to wrap up here we're going past 11 a little bit, maybe a few more minutes if you don't mind, is that every contract project you do can be a referral source, even if not a big paying gig, so to speak. I don't use the word gig except among consultants. So I never say no. I have never said no to any project. I don't care if it's $100 or 10,000 or whatever it is. I take every project on, always have, never said no because of the referral benefit I get from that project. And it's always enabled me to get referred on to something else. Unpaid service, I've served on nonprofit boards. I've chaired nonprofit boards, not many. I've been an interim paid CEO of a nonprofit board, but that gives me a connection in the community that I would not have had. So that seems to work well, for me. If necessary, I've referred prospects to other consultants if that prospect ultimately is unable to meet my fee expectations and working arrangements. And then the other thing I've done that really is something you may want to consider is this. I made the mistake early on once of allowing the client to tell me how to perform my assignment. And when I did that, the project failed. And I learned a really important lesson there. And that is, I never have made the mistake since then to allow a client to tell me how to perform my work. I stick with my proven business model processes and I don't waver. I might adjust it in some respect to make sure the client feels like I'm hearing him, but I stick to my discipline. So, John, didn't you have a question here? You said you wanted to ask about this particular slide. No, or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was another question. Let me go.
Yes, there has also been a question about, do you respond to RFPs, requests for proposals?
I do not respond well. I'm going to say do not respond well unless it's from a client who is required to go out and get an RFP. Normally, I don't respond to RFPs. I just don't make it a practice because what happens is that they take the prospect takes your RFP, compares it to others, and I'm just making them smarter in terms of how to go to market and what they want to do. And then sometimes they come back and just do it themselves. So I choose not to respond to open RFPs. I know a lot of people do. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. If I can't sit in front of the client and win and have confidence that this is an opportunity to win that engagement, doing an RFP where they don't even see me there, they don't understand the personality, I don't understand the dynamics of the situation, is not going to win it for me. So I'm part of a small business organization group here in Oregon, and I get notices all the time as far as opportunities to bid on government contracts and so forth. And I see them coming through. Some could appeal to me, but when I see what's all involved with it, I choose not to do that because the return on my investment is of time and energy and effort, and waiting is not going to happen. More than likely, they already have somebody in mind who's had a relationship with them, and they just have to go public to do this. So I have submitted. Now I've submitted how I would go about addressing the project when I have a high probability that I'm going to get it, even by going through that process. So it's not a standard practice of mine. What other question, John?
Well, let's see. There's an important point that you and I had talked about, and you've got this slide up about that, and that is working with other consultants because of the IMC Code of Ethics, that if you're not qualified with education or training on a particular aspect of your project, that rather than turning that project down, you work with other colleagues whom you trust. And that's one of the wonderful benefits of belonging to the IMC, where you are in a group with a common set of principles that you all agree upon.
Right. Well, before I get into this, I'll just back up a little bit. Now, I just want to talk about this. Well, that's the next one. I want to back up just a little bit. Can I have a few more minutes, John, to kind of get through this?
Yes. Go right ahead. If people need to leave, we will be sending out slides, but if you can stay on the call here, I think you'll be really pleased with our conclusion here.
Great. So when I say never stop building a database of contacts, I've got a database of about 4,000 contacts from all of my market niches, plus others that I've mined over the years and continue to mine. And one of the things that I like to do is really be able to promote what I do, training programs and so forth, through to my niche markets. I like to identify potential partners to work with, so I do that a lot, whether they be other consultants, CEOs, CFOs, CPAs, attorneys, HR professionals, etc. All part of individuals that I develop for a database. And I market to them in a variety of ways. I'm just now learning how to use social media. So I'm a real neophyte in that regard. Within the next 3 months, I should have a pretty good model for doing that as well. And even where I'm at age 76 and a half, I'm doing it more for fun to see if I can make it happen. And I've only got room for a few more, maybe 1 or 2 more clients that I want to work with. And I can refer these relationships on to others. But one of the things that's important from my point of view is to introduce your contacts to others when you're asked for information, and make referrals as well. So I do that a lot. So I cross-referral my clients to others, and they are very appreciative of it because they see that I'm not self-serving, that my goal is to put their interest ahead of mine, and it just comes back and pays for itself in spades. So when I talk about building your database, my experience has been to become a member of professional business associations like IMC and others in your niche market space. Serve on an industry association board, collect industry association membership lists, or ask a member if they're willing to share the association list without violating membership, disclosure rules. Associations and connecting with them in your maybe area of expertise is a great way to go to market. Find speaking engagements where it's in your niche market arena. And if you agree to be a speaker, do it on the basis you may not get paid. Now, I'm not worried about getting paid as a speaker. I want the referral sources. I want to connect with those that attend those meetings. And so typically I will ask for a list of the attendees or access to their membership base in the form of compensation. So that seems to work well for me. And then when I check in sometimes to register, even if I'm just an attendee, sometimes I can ask at the registration desk Is there a possibility of getting a copy of the registration list? Because I see them checking off all the names and email addresses and so forth. And more often they will say, sure, just come by later and we'll give you a copy. Or sometimes they refuse to do that, but you at least can ask. So we go on to the next slide here, and that is create revenue generating partnerships. Cross-referring with other consultant colleagues is a great way of partnering together on a project or referring each other to other projects. That typically is a great way to do it. That's why membership of IMC or other professional associations is worth making the investment. Collaborate or partner with other consultants. I have several what I call co-marketing, financially driven agreements with other consultants where we cross-refer projects to each other and we share revenue streams as far as doing that, even if we aren't partnering on the project together. And that really works well. In some cases, I have LLCs or form an LLC with other consultants or professionals where we have a business model that potentially and ultimately could be sold. And the other thing I do is I form 2 peer groups. Most of you have heard the Vistage group, for example, which is a product from tech back in my era. And there's other groups out there like that. 27 years ago, I started the CEO peer group, which I facilitated. We celebrated we're going to celebrate our 27th year at the end of this year. Have somewhere between 7 to 9 CEO members who have ultimately become clients of mine. We meet a couple times a year. Now we're meeting by Zoom every other month, and I check in with them in between each month. Subsequently, I formed the CFO group. These CFOs happen to be the CFOs of the CEOs, and they wanted something like that for their CFOs. So I've got 2 peer groups that I can relate to, seek information from, even though they're clients of mine. And when I facilitate the discussions, whatever they ask me, I just respond to. There's no fee charge for doing that. But they often talk among themselves privately and publicly about the relationship they've had with me. And as a result, it often has led to additional retention projects. So the next slide, number 9, is forging long-term relationships with clients. This is what really I have found sustains one's business model for me. I have clients 35 and 40 years as far as the companies that still retain me, not on a regular month in, year in and out basis, but they do retain me and they come back to me for projects. And I've been able to sustain that just because I've maintained ongoing relationships with them. And naturally, CEOs, boards have turned over, but I'm still around and I'm still accessible. And someone remembers the relationship we have and they get a hold of me. So I think that's really important. And as you do that, my vision is, my philosophy is to visualize my clients as being better off because of their relationship with me. That's what I want to make sure happens. And they seem to sense that I make the client a top priority. It's not my number one priority as among all clients, but it's a top priority. And my goal is to influence their growth and their prosperity and to exceed their expectations, to go over and above what they expected me to have, and they will share that with me at the end of the day, and that's what solidifies a long-term relationship. And as you're working with a client, I always try to keep, in my case, identifying key issues and needs they may have while weaving solutions and skills into our engagement. And as I identify needs and so forth that are totally unrelated to my skill set, it gives me an opportunity to introduce them to someone else. And I've done that on multiple occasions, and the clients still continue to retain me because they appreciate the value that I'm bringing to the table. So it's really important from my perspective, valuable to visualize showing your clients how to achieve the results they want to achieve. So this all is discovered during your diagnostic phase, your initial meeting phase, the questions that you ask and so forth, and then reiterating when you're done with your first meeting or before you even start an engagement, in writing, this is what I understand the results are that you want to achieve. Are we on the same page? And they will then confirm that or modify it so you know what the landscape looks like. And then we can develop an action plan. And sometimes I will verbalize that and say, well, this is what I perceive would be a process that I would begin addressing on your behalf, but I need to give it substantial additional thought before I put it in writing. Does that sound reasonable to you? And they will say yes, however, but also consider this. So you get some additional information. The last mindset is one that I often find is being ignored by independent consultants. And what I see being ignored is that many are unwilling, or do not, maybe unwilling isn't the right word, do not see the value of investing in their personal growth. I've invested thousands of dollars in my own personal development by attending conferences. I never stopped learning. I never stopped networking. I continue to be open to seeking second opinions from those in my network. And I have a multiple group of resources I can go to just to test check my thinking to make sure I'm not going down a path that is unduly influenced by my emotions. I always want to separate fact from emotion, and I get second opinions, and I value the opinions when I know the other party is just being frank, direct, upfront with me. Don't worry about my feelings. My goal is to produce the best result I'm capable of producing. And I share information with peers. People call me or other colleagues call me, and I'm happy to share my perspective, just kind of like we're sharing today. And I really try to foster and perpetuate concepts to develop mutually beneficial relationships for support and advice. And I'm always looking for opportunities to do that because it's stimulating. But if you aren't willing to invest in yourself, you're missing an opportunity to really grow your practice. And the best time to invest is when you can't afford to. And I know that sounds truly incongruous, but when you're not making money, you got to spend money to get ahead. And when you're making, when you are making money, you better put it away so you can have money available when you aren't making money. It's just a totally inverse thinking process. But even in the early times, the worst times I had, I made an investment in my own personal development to grow and to develop my business model, and it paid off handsomely. So when we talk about what we're talking about here, really, in my mind, the mindset is for each of us to perfect our craft. We want to be, in my mind, the best we can be in our discipline, whatever that is. We want to focus on doing the best you can for your clients, and you'll be able to do that if you invest in being the best in your discipline. And you want to show clients or guide them how to be the best they can be. And your clients will sense this about you. And when they sense this about you, it's going to really forge a long-term relationship that I mentioned earlier. So finally, probably when you take a look at being a member of IMC, never compromise your integrity. I've been fired from engagements because I was unwilling to compromise my integrity. And yes, I lost a chunk of money. I may have had second thoughts about it afterwards, but I always came back to the grounding that I promised myself. I would never compromise my integrity. And I would always put my self-interest aside for the best interest of the client that I've been engaged by to work with. That's top of mind. And I have declined projects because I'm skeptical about the integrity and intentions of the client and either his or her team or the board of directors. And you will find there may be a circumstance occasionally where you get engaged to be used by the client to motivate their own personal interest, and you end up potentially being used by that client for their own self-interest. And if you sense that's happening, it might be worthwhile to really reevaluate whether or not you want to engage with that person or cut that engagement off, for example. So If anyone would like to chat with me sometime, give me a call. Contact information is right here. Happy to chat with you, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the relationship I've had over the years with others and consultants like those who are on the phone. So, John, with that concludes my presentation.
Wonderful. Very good. Very good. There was another question, and it was a very general question about, exactly what are the kinds of services that